The fluorescent lights of the subway car flickered twice before dying completely, plunging Rachel Martinez into absolute darkness. The train had been slowing already, somewhere between 51st Street and Grand Central, when the world simply ceased to exist. One moment she'd been reviewing case files on her laptop, the blue glow reflecting off her reading glasses. The next, nothing but black silence and the metallic groan of brakes bringing the car to a halt. Rachel's first instinct was to grip her briefcase tighter, as if the leather handle could anchor her to reality. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat counting the seconds of uncertainty. Around her, she heard gasps, whispers, and the rustling of bodies shifting in seats. Someone's phone screen lit up briefly before dying, the battery apparently drained at the worst possible moment. "Is everyone all right?" A male voice called from somewhere to her left, calm despite the situation. The voice carried a slight rasp, like someone who'd spent years in dusty places. A chorus of uncertain affirmations rippled through the car. Rachel cleared her throat, surprised by how dry it felt. "What happened?" she asked, hating the tremor in her voice. She was 32 years old, a senior associate at a prestigious Manhattan law firm, and she prided herself on maintaining composure. But darkness had a way of stripping away such pretenses. "Looks like a power failure," the same male voice responded. "Citywide, probably. I saw the skyline go dark right before we entered the tunnel." Rachel processed this information with growing unease. A citywide blackout meant no quick rescue. They could be stuck here for hours. She thought of her apartment in the Upper West Side, her cat Felix who needed feeding, the deposition she had scheduled for tomorrow morning. Her mind began cataloging problems, organizing chaos into manageable lists, the way it always did when anxiety crept in. "Everyone should stay calm," another voice added, this one female and elderly. "They'll get us out eventually. Eventually." The word hung in the stale underground air like a question mark. Rachel shifted in her seat, acutely aware of the strangers surrounding her in the darkness. The subway car that had felt merely crowded minutes ago now felt like a tomb. She could hear breathing, the creak of vinyl seats, someone's stomach gurgling nervously. "My name's James, by the way," the calm voice offered. "I'm about 3 seats down from the middle door if anyone needs anything." Rachel found herself speaking before she could stop herself. "I'm Rachel," near the end of the car. She wasn't sure why she volunteered this information, except that his voice had sounded genuinely concerned. Genuinely human. Human, that's what they all were, she realized, stripped of everything but voice and presence. The darkness pressed against Rachel's eyes like a physical weight. She'd removed her glasses and tucked them into her jacket pocket, though it made no difference. Blind or sighted, everyone was equal now in this lightless metal tube suspended beneath Manhattan's streets. "So, Rachel," James's voice drifted through the black, "what do you do when the lights are on?" She almost laughed at the phrasing. "I'm a tax attorney." Thrilling stuff. Lots of spreadsheets and corporate compliance. The self-deprecation came easily in the dark, without worrying about maintaining her professional image. "You? Photographer. I work for news agencies, mostly international assignments." There was a pause, then he added, "Just got back from Lebanon last week." Rachel's eyebrows rose in the darkness. "That's quite different from tax law. Probably safer too," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "At least bullets are more straightforward than the IRS." This time she did laugh, a genuine sound that surprised her. When was the last time she'd laughed at work, or even about work? The past 3 years had been a relentless climb toward partnership, every day measured in billable hours and client satisfaction metrics. Around them, other conversations began sprouting in the darkness. An elderly woman worried aloud about her grandchildren in Brooklyn. 2 college students debated whether this was a terrorist attack. A man in a business suit kept checking his watch, the luminous dial casting a tiny green glow that disappeared each time he lowered his wrist. "Were you working late?" James asked, pulling Rachel back into their private dialogue. "Always," she admitted. "I had a client meeting that ran until 7. "You?" "Visiting my father in Mount Sinai Hospital. He's not doing well." The casual tone couldn't quite mask the heaviness beneath. "Cancer, stage 4. Rachel's chest tightened. "I'm sorry," she said softly, the inadequate words floating into the void between them. "Thank you. It's why I came back to the States. Spent the last 5 years documenting conflicts in the Middle East and Africa. But some things are more important than the perfect shot." He shifted in his seat, the sound carrying clearly through the stillness. What about you? Family in the city? My parents are in New Jersey. I should probably call them when we get out of here. Let them know I'm okay. Rachel realized she hadn't spoken to her mother in almost 2 weeks. Their last conversation ending in the usual uncomfortable silence that had defined their relationship since the divorce. The divorce? James asked, and Rachel realized with a start that she'd spoken the last word aloud. Heat flooded her cheeks, invisible in the darkness. Sorry, thinking out loud. Yes, I went through a divorce 2 years ago. My mother took it harder than I did, I think. She keeps asking when I'll start dating again. And will you? The question was gentle, genuinely curious rather than intrusive. Something about the darkness made it feel safe to answer honestly. I don't know. Maybe I've forgotten how. Or maybe I never really knew in the first place. Someone's phone rang 3 cars down, the sound muffled but distinct. It rang 4 times before stopping, leaving behind a silence that felt even heavier than before. Rachel wondered how many people were trying to reach them right now, voices calling into an absence that couldn't answer back. Time check? Someone called out. The businessman with the glowing watch responded, 7:43. They'd been in darkness for almost 20 minutes. It felt like hours. Rachel's back was beginning to ache from sitting rigidly upright, so she finally let herself lean against the window behind her. The glass was cool, almost refreshing against her neck. She closed her eyes, then opened them again, amused by how the gesture meant nothing. Can I ask you something? James's voice came again, closer now. She thought maybe he'd shifted to face her direction. Sure. Why do you think you forgot how to date? If that's not too personal for a blackout conversation. Rachel considered deflecting with humor, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the anonymity of darkness, or maybe it was the strange intimacy of voices without faces. Because I built walls, she said quietly. Good, solid, professionally constructed walls. After my marriage fell apart, I decided it was safer to focus on work. Partnerships don't cheat on you. Briefs don't wake up one day and decide they want someone younger and more exciting. The words came out more bitter than she'd intended. She waited for judgment, or worse, pity. Instead, James said, my ex-fiancé told me I was married to my camera. Said I'd rather document life than actually live it. She wasn't wrong. What happened? I chose a 3-month assignment in Syria over her sister's wedding. By the time I got back, she'd moved on. Can't say I blamed her. He paused, and Rachel heard him take a deep breath. The thing is, I kept choosing the camera. Every time. Afghanistan, Iraq, South Sudan. I told myself I was bearing witness to history, giving voice to the voiceless. Noble stuff, but Rachel prompted, but I was also running. It's easier to photograph other people's pain than deal with your own. Easier to be the observer than the participant. Rachel felt something crack inside her chest, a small fissure in those carefully constructed walls. That's what I do too, she admitted. Except my camera is a desk and a 100-hour work week. My Syria is a corner office. Someone coughed in the darkness, a wet, rattling sound that reminded everyone they were still trapped together in stale air. The temperature had risen noticeably, bodies heating the enclosed space. Rachel shrugged off her blazer, draping it across her lap. So here's my real question, James continued. Those walls you built, do they keep people out, or do they keep you in? Rachel opened her mouth and closed it. No one had ever asked her that before. Her therapist had circled around it. Her mother had implied it. Her few remaining friends had hinted at it, but no one had stated it so directly. Both, she finally whispered. Definitely both. Yeah, James said softly. Same. They sat in silence for several minutes. But it was different now. Comfortable. 2 strangers acknowledging their shared isolation in a way that somehow made them less alone. You know what's funny? Rachel said eventually. Right now, trapped in this tunnel, I feel less stuck than I have in years. She heard James shift again, could almost sense him smiling in the darkness. Maybe that's because you can't see the walls when the lights are out. The truth of it struck her like a physical blow. Without her tailored suit, her expensive briefcase, her carefully maintained appearance of success, she was just Rachel. Just a voice admitting fears to another voice admitting his own. The darkness had stripped away every defense she'd spent 2 years building. Tell me about the places you've been, she said, wanting to hear more of his voice, wanting to travel beyond these metal walls. Tell me what you've seen. James was quiet for a moment, as if sorting through thousands of images stored in his memory. When he spoke, His voice carried a different quality, softer and more reverent. I was in Kabul 3 years ago, covering the aftermath of a bombing. Terrible devastation, buildings reduced to rubble, families searching for loved ones. Standard horrible day in a war zone. He paused and Rachel heard him shift his weight. But then I saw this couple. Couldn't have been more than 20 years old. They were getting married in the ruins of what used to be a community center. No walls, no roof, just the frame of the building and maybe 30 people gathered around. Rachel found herself leaning forward slightly, drawn into the story. The bride wore a dress someone had sewn from salvaged fabric. The groom had borrowed a suit 3 sizes too big. And they were radiant, absolutely glowing with joy. I asked the groom afterward, through a translator, why they didn't wait. Why not postpone until things were safer, until they could afford a proper wedding? What did he say? Rachel asked. He said, "We've waited through 5 years of war. If we wait for safety, we'll wait forever. Love doesn't wait for perfect conditions." James's voice grew thick with emotion. I took maybe 200 photos that day, but that's the one that changed how I see everything. It won a prize, ran in magazines worldwide. But the real prize was the lesson. Rachel felt tears prickling at her eyes, grateful for the darkness that hid them. "That's beautiful. I've seen it everywhere," James continued. "Gaza, Somalia, Ukraine, places where everything is falling apart and people still find each other, still choose each other. There was this older couple in Aleppo, must have been in their 70s. Their home had been destroyed. They were living in a refugee camp, had lost 2 sons in the fighting. And every morning the husband would find something to give his wife. A flower growing through concrete, a smooth stone, once just a handful of clean water. Small things, but the way he presented them, like he was offering her the world. "Why are you telling me this?" Rachel asked, though she thought she knew. "Because you asked why you've forgotten how to date, how to open yourself up. But I think you're asking the wrong question. The question isn't how, it's why. And the answer is everywhere, even in the worst places. Especially in the worst places." Rachel absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. "You think suffering makes love more valuable?" "No," James said firmly. "I think suffering makes people realize what's actually valuable. Those couples I photographed, they weren't in love because of war. They were in love despite it. The war just burned away everything else, all the superficial nonsense, until only the essential remained." A woman's voice interrupted from across the car, apologetic and embarrassed. "I'm sorry, but are you James Chen, the photographer?" Yes," James said, sounding surprised. "I thought I recognized your voice. I'm a photo editor at the Times. We published your series on Syrian refugees last year. It was extraordinary work." Rachel felt a strange flutter in her chest. She'd been talking to someone accomplished, someone whose work reached millions, and yet he'd been speaking to her like an equal, like a friend. No pretense, no name-dropping, just honest conversation. "Thank you," James said simply. "That series was important to me." The editor asked a few more questions, and other passengers joined in, recognizing his name now. The conversation expanded, filling the car with discussion about journalism, ethics, and the power of images. Rachel listened, learning more about the man whose face she still couldn't see. Eventually, the conversation wound down, and the car returned to smaller pockets of dialogue. Rachel heard James excuse himself from the group and sensed him turning back toward her. "Sorry about that," he said quietly. Just to her. "Don't apologize. You're talented at what you do. That's nothing to hide," says the tax attorney who probably has 3 Ivy League degrees. Rachel laughed. "Just 2. And they're gathering dust on my office wall while I review corporate deductions. Do you like it?" The work? No one had asked her that in years. "I'm good at it," she said, which wasn't an answer, and they both knew it. The temperature in the subway car had climbed steadily, and Rachel could feel a thin film of perspiration forming along her hairline. Someone had suggested opening the emergency windows, and now warm tunnel air circulated sluggishly through the space, bringing with it the smell of metal dust and electricity that wasn't flowing. "Time?" someone asked again. 8:37. Over an hour now. Rachel's phone was dead, her laptop battery drained. All her carefully organized files, her calendar reminders, her digital armor, rendered useless. She should have felt anxious, panicked even. Instead, she felt oddly calm, suspended in this moment between her life before and whatever came after. "You said you were visiting your father," Rachel said softly, returning to their private conversation. "If you don't mind me asking, how long has he been sick?" James took a long breath, and she heard the weight in it. "Officially? 6 months, but I think he knew longer than that. My father isn't the type to complain. He's a retired firefighter, spent 30 years running into burning buildings while everyone else ran out. Stoic doesn't begin to cover it. That must be where you get it from. The courage to go to war zones." "Maybe," James said. "Or maybe I was running too, just in a different direction. He wanted me to stay in New York, take over his construction business. Build things instead of just photographing them. We fought about it constantly before I left." Rachel heard the regret threading through his words like a dark ribbon. "And now? Now he's dying, and I'm realizing how much time I wasted being angry at him for not understanding my choices. Turns out he understood perfectly. He just wanted me to be safe, to be close. That's not controlling, that's love." I was too stubborn to see the difference. A lump formed in Rachel's throat. She thought about her own parents, the careful distance she'd maintained since the divorce, her mother's disappointed silences, her father's awkward attempts to stay neutral. "Have you told him that?" "That you understand now?" "Trying to. The cancer's in his lungs, so talking is hard for him. But yesterday, before I left the hospital, I held his hand and told him I was sorry. That he was right about a lot of things." James's voice cracked slightly. "He squeezed my hand 3 times. Our old code for I love you from when I was a kid." Rachel felt tears sliding down her cheeks now, hot against her skin. "That's beautiful, James, that you came back. That you're here. I almost didn't. Had an assignment offer in Yemen. Really compelling story. For about 24 hours, I seriously considered going. Can you believe that? My father is dying, and I was weighing it against a potential cover shot." He laughed bitterly. "My editor actually had to tell me to get my priorities straight." "How messed up is that?" "You're here now," Rachel said firmly. "That's what matters. Is it, though? Is now enough when you've missed so much before?" The question hung in the darkness, raw and vulnerable. Rachel thought about her own absences. The family dinners she'd skipped for depositions, the holidays she'd worked through, the calls she'd ignored because billable hours didn't stop for personal matters. "I think," she said slowly, "that now is all any of us really have. The past is gone, and the future is uncertain, especially right now, stuck in this tunnel." "Philosophy in the dark," James said, and she could hear the slight smile returning to his voice. "Free of charge, even. Usually I bill by the hour." They both laughed, the sound mixing with the murmur of other conversations around them. Someone was singing quietly, an old Motown song that others gradually joined. The human need for connection, Rachel thought, for shared experience even in crisis, maybe especially in crisis. "Can I tell you something I've never admitted to anyone?" James asked suddenly. "Of course. Part of me is relieved to be stuck here. In this tunnel, I'm not at the hospital watching my father struggle to breathe. I'm not in my childhood apartment, now converted to a sick room, counting the days. I'm just here in the dark, talking to a stranger who somehow doesn't feel like a stranger at all." He paused. "Does that make me a terrible son?" "No," Rachel said immediately. "It makes you human. Grief is exhausting. Sometimes we need a break from it, even when we love the person we're grieving. You sound like you know something about that." Rachel hesitated, then decided to trust the darkness with her own truth. "My grandmother raised me more than my parents did. They were both busy with careers, so I spent every summer with her in Connecticut. She taught me to bake, to garden, to play poker. She was my best friend." Rachel's voice wavered. "When she got Alzheimer's, I visited less and less. Told myself I was busy with law school, but really I just couldn't watch her forget me. By the time she died 6 years ago, I'd seen her maybe 3 times in 2 years. Rachel, I'm not telling you this for sympathy," she interrupted gently. "I'm telling you because I understand guilt. I understand the complicated mess of love and fear and avoidance. And I'm telling you that your father squeezing your hand 3 times means you haven't wasted anything. You're there. You came back. That's more than I can say." The silence that followed was heavy with shared understanding, with the weight of regrets acknowledged and somehow lightened by being spoken aloud. "Thank you," James whispered finally. "For what?" "For being here. For listening. For being honest." Rachel smiled in the darkness. "Thank you for the same."